Okay, so our second speaker for this panel, for this block, is Mahta. Mahta Ramezanian is a graduate student in computer science with a background in physics, machine learning, and system dynamics. She's currently a research assistant at Mila, Quebec, and CHU St. Justin, focusing on development of generative models and brain dynamics, as well as applications in neuroscience and the detection of autism. Mahta is curious about the social impact of AI research, particularly in healthcare. She has experience as a teaching and research assistant at University of Waterloo, working on statistical mechanics, and today she's going to give a talk entitled Generative Models of Brain Dynamics. Here you go.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I am an incoming student at PPSB and CERC AAI lab with Guillaume Dumas, respectively, and Irina Risch. And our research is focused on system identification for brain imaging. Thank you for the invite. Shahab said it's the best thing for a scientist to be invited by students. Imagine how it feels for another student, especially because this is a topic that we as a team have been thinking a lot about during the past 2 years, and we have had some outputs on it, both in publication and in review. And it's spring 2023. Who doesn't want to talk about generative models? So here we go. I am going to talk about generative models for neural dynamics. And first thing, why is it not just a mere application of machine learning, like weather forecast, finance data? So the story is that neural data is different. If you have worked with neural data, you might come across this question a lot during your presentation. Oh, like 10 participants is so low, like you have been dealing with low signal to noise ratio, other problems like that. And on a higher level, neural models need to be interpretable because they have health implications, and because we are doing science also. And on the left here, I have a graphical abstract of a Cell publication that neural data specifically are very easy to manipulate. Connectome-based machine learning models are vulnerable to subtle data manipulation, both enhancement and adversarial manipulations. And this is also a matter of trustworthiness and credibility of publications in neuroscience. But also there is a hope. Neural dynamics is different. Neural dynamics is product of evolution. There are theories, people do neuroscience, and there are similarities across the species, and it is output of an autonomous and self-regularizing system. We also argue that we want to prioritize inference over prediction because we are doing science and we want to answer the question of why, and we want to have reproducible and explainable results. So this plot, you might have seen it from Guillaume's presentation. I am going through the order of one of the surveys we did on extensively all the different kinds of generative models for neuroscience, which date back to 2008 until now. And we categorize them by three main categories: biologically inspired phenomenological ones and agnostic computational ones. We talk about them, and I'll argue what could be the future of generative models for neuroscience and what are the paths forward. let's define what these names mean and what are the examples of that. By biological inspired models, I am talking about models that are built on biological constraints and priors. For example, some of you might know is Nevik paper, like a whole brain or like part of brain simulation based on very mechanistic neuromodulations and compartments. On another level, we have phenomenological levels and analogies to dynamical similarities between neural populations and well-understood physical mathematical models are useful in this category. That means that it's not about what's like small biological details are. What we care about is the collective physical behavior of these biological systems. And lastly, we do ML as agnostic computational models. Like I give you 50 time steps of EEG, predict for me, for example, 5 next time steps. That would be one example of that. We don't care about where this EEG comes from, in a sense that what is the mechanistics of behind this. We get a lot of data, we train our models, we get some predictions. And whether your model is realistic or abstract, it can be, model or your truth on different levels of organization, from single level to whole brain, from realistic to abstract. Of course, there are some challenges navigating through this graph, but it's also important to think about when talking about generating brain data, what levels of concepts or which of the Mars levels of abstraction we are talking about. Is it mechanism, is it function, or is it cognition? For biological inspired model, just to ground ourselves in what has been done, the whole brain simulation has started probably with Izinikovic paper. They started by, okay, we have 22 types of synapses. We make some assumptions and we build the whole brain from these small calculations and we scale up. Of course, one can imagine that there comes different types of computational complications. This is what I just described is a bottom-up approach. And although it has been resulted in Blue Brain project didn't live up to the expectations because of all the complications that can come up. You can't just scale up things. You need different frameworks for computations. More is different. And as a fix for that came a human brain project and different neural mass population simulations that were based on some mathematical tools, for example, taken from physics. In physics, we have a mean field approximation to go from little interaction between molecules to statistical physics phenomenon descriptions. Because, for example, you cannot describe pressure based on little interaction between gas molecules. You never have the enough computation, for example, for this room to find the pressure based on interactions. So in neuroscience, we might want to bridge this gap with some mathematical tools too. There are also other approaches, for example, with neuromorphic computing and spiking neural networks that are especially interesting because this difficulty of computation in these NPUs rather than TPUs or GPUs are met with a change in hardware. And not only this can be interesting for generating this cognitive behavior that is very computationally expensive, it can also be useful for deep learning. The second section was, as I described to you, was phenomenological models, where we don't care about details of intricate biological phenomena, but we care about the whole behavior of this physical system. Imagine examples of this kind of approach that might be familiar to your ear, might be Kuromoto, because you see, when you are talking about population, you can talk about synchrony between different populations. So Kuromoto dynamics, for example, is interesting one, as it is by Kuromoto, you can talk about how different population of neurons are coupled together. And on another level, how different brains are coupled together. And this is what, for example, what we do at PPSP lab as an indicator of autism, because autism can be hypothesized to be about coupling between different brains. There's Van der Pol, which is another type of dynamical system, and there has been a paper from our team, from Abrevasha and colleagues, which has been successful in predicting fMRI, calcium imaging, and zebrafish simulation, and regenerating them by identifying dynamical modes with Van der Pol oscillators. And lastly, what is most interesting for us right now is probably agnostic computational models. This is where agnostic black box ML might fit, and also a bunch of other things. So, for example, a sparse identification of nonlinear dynamic, which is basically a mapping of your brain imaging onto dynamics, which is interpretable for us. Or neural ODEs, and also recurrent neural nets, which have some biological plausible, which can be incorporated with some biological assumptions too. And on the right, you can see an architecture developed by our team also. It's called GokuNet, which this architecture is interesting for this talk because it actually sits between this slide and the slide before. Because GokuNet is an architecture that, rather than being a VAE, which gets the data and maps it to a latent space that is not interpretable, takes the data and approximate unknowns based on the knowns of the system. And here we are, and we in this project we are arguing that with this approach, which with approximating unknowns based on the knowns we have, you are injecting inductive bias, but on the other hand, you are reducing the need for data, which is a thing, which is what you need for a regime that is where the data is scarce. And also, we have an ODE solver, and we can, rather than just a latent space that we don't know this parameter is about what, we have actually an ODE, ordinary differential equation, that describes our phenomena. And lastly, I'd like to just go a little bit away from just our group and what's happening in the world right now. A couple of months ago, of course, generating neural dynamics with diffusion models came out. I'm sorry that you can't see the reference. This is from I think the title, which doesn't show here for some reason, is the high resolution reconstruction of images from fMRI data. So at the top, you can see the real images that were shown to the subject. And at the second row, you see the reconstructions based on the fMRI of these subjects. If you look at it, it's actually impressive. So like you can clearly see the teddy bear, you can see the park. It's just based on fMRI and a latent diffusion model, kind of like mind reading. And what is interesting here is that this latent diffusion model gives a substrate for studying different components, such as how these different parameters in this latent diffusion model is connected to distinct brain functions. Shahab mentioned that there has been studies that show that there are many correlations between brain functions and, for example, language models. There is a 2021 study from King Remy that showed the actual correspondence between language models and brain. I am not sure about the vision. Actually, they have also a study showing for visions, but this one is particularly interesting because you can start, you can very much have a hands-on experience on how these parameters relate to distinct brain functions. Although it comes from latent diffusion models, if you don't know, it is pretty big. It is the model that is behind a stable diffusion, actually. The take-home message that I want to give for this talk, anyways, is that the neuroscience data is different and it has its own complications. And what I am proposing here is that we need a balance between complexity, inductive bias, data availability, and prior knowledge of the system. And for that, we are arguing that hybrid models are the way to go. Here in this plot, the blue ones are the very well-studied models so far. Of course, DCM, Blue Brain. The purple ones are still old, but kind of in between. And the red ones, I think, are the ones to go, which are data-driven, but also grounded in phenomenological truths. And with that, I'd like to conclude, and thank you for your attention. And if any questions you might have, I would be happy to answer.
Please feel free to go to that mic or raise up your hand and I'll come to you for any questions.
Oh, I did a great job. Thank you.
Can you tell us a bit more about the diffusion model that you're talking about, that the mind reading thing?
Oh, yeah, sure. Sorry, so the diffusion model is actually pre-trained on language and vision. And here it's a downstream task. So diffusion models are the models that go from noise to image, for example. Here they go to image and text, actually. And so they train the models to go from fMRI to image. And so the training was with subjects seeing an image and with model predictor.
So based on the discussion that you had about the balance between the data-driven and also inductive biases from the biology, how do you see this diffusion model, this study, as a model of the brain? So from what I understand, it's like a diffusion model that is being trained on text to image, such as Dolly and so on, but now they're trying to use it as a model of the brain. What I can see is that it's like more like predicting what the person is seeing based on the data, but how much you can tell from its internal representations, how much, basically how you can understand that it's aligned with the brain or not. Have they looked at it or?
So the way that, whether for diffusion models or different models, you can look at the correspondence with cognition is usually using some correlation. Here they're using Pearson correlation for voxel-wise model applied to these test images. Here, as they are predicting the accuracy of what is the activity given that image, for example, the activity in the fMRI.
So the training objective here was to reconstruct the image that is shown to the model.
Yes.
But they also check for similarities in the internal representations and fMRI.
Yes.
And similarity to fMRI just emerges, or there is something in the training that they're considering, for example, forcing the activations to be similar to the brain.
I am not sure if the loss function is screwed to show that. I mean, if it is, whether it is or not, it's still interesting.
Yeah, sure.
But yes, it is a different experiment showing that. And it's nice that such a blind model can predict actually brain imaging, like activity like that.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
So give a round of applause and we will move to the other speaker.